am joined today by Lisa Lloyd from It's Time for Change. And Lisa and I met on LinkedIn through James Butler, who was my previous business partner in Painless Practice. And Lisa had posted something about a workshop or something that she was doing around purpose and values and, really the culture of the organization. And James completely got on this and said, oh my gosh, you've got to meet Celia. That's what she does all day, every day with clinics. So we are in different sectors, but we kind of sing from the same hymn sheet. So Lisa, I'm so looking forward to our conversation today. So let's start by, do you want to just give a bit of an introduction about who you are?
Thank you, Celia. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this as well, because you and I hit it off straight away. As soon as when you speak to someone with a kindred spirit, and we're both so passionate about the same thing. So I'm a chartered psychologist and psychotherapist, and I work with organisations to help them become, I guess, better places for people to be, where they want to be and they enjoy being. And I try to move away a little bit from the what people think of as a psychologist in terms of, all being very formal and your clipboard and assessments and so on. That's not me. So I will work with people essentially to find out what and organisations to help them identify what helps them feel good and perform well, and really enjoy what they're doing so they can do it well, and what gets in the way, and how to overcome some of that.
Brilliant. So, so today we're really going to be focusing on that planning for that positive employee experience. And there's so many different elements that come into that. And in our sector, kind of in the clinic world, some of the challenges are that the owner is not necessarily always working at the same time as all their team members. So it's not a typical office environment. And I completely appreciate that that's changed in the world from COVID anyway. So, that's probably happening more in other organizations as well. So your insights on that would be really interesting. And then the other area is that at the moment, it's really hard to recruit therapists in particular. And so I'm kind of always interested in working out how do we position the business in the recruitment drive to attract team members, to get them to understand what this amazing culture is that they'd be joining. So there's various strands in that, and then there's a thing around well, how do you create that culture? How do you roll out that culture without it being inauthentic? So there's just, I guess, so many different strands. So, where shall we start, Lisa?
Well, I guess, you mentioned the words about kind of employee experience. And I think for me, it's really important, isn't it, to get away from thinking about almost silos around, we're just going to focus on recruitment, or we're just going to focus on people's well-being, or whatever kind of people traditionally do, and actually to take a step back and look at the whole picture, the big picture, which is around the experience of people when they go to work. Because then we can start joining the dots more. You have something that's much more meaningful. So if you're looking at recruitment, well, that's got to be around your culture, which has got to be around, do employees feel well, and are they able to perform, and have they got good leadership that knows how to create a culture which is based on values that are meaningful to people, and so on. And once you step back and have a picture, it can feel really overwhelming. Like there is just, how do we get a head around what this actually looks like in our practice? But as soon as you step back and look at the big picture, you can start to identify all the areas that might have a part to play, and then start unpicking those and saying, well, what do we mean by values, or what do we mean by culture? And actually just start having the conversations within your own organization.
Yeah, and I think what I sometimes see that happens, and I saw it in a bigger clinic environment, a really kind of key example that sat with me a lot was the kind of leaders went off into the mountains, or whatever you want to call it, and had this lovely, kind of meeting and exec meeting, sat around the table and decided what their purpose was, what their values were, and then they came and they put it on the wall in the clinic. And I remember very clearly delivering a workshop, and I was facing the wall and the delegates were facing me. So the the kind of team members were facing me. And I kind of said, so guys, tell me about the culture of your business. Why is this business in existence? What are the key things that are really important about the team experience, the patient experience? And everybody kind of floundered. And I said, what about what's on the wall behind you? And the one of the kind of leaders was in the room, and they said, oh, we haven't really rolled that out yet.
Oh, my goodness.
And it kind of made me think, wow, that's sitting on your wall. Like, so I think that there's a really big disconnect between what culture is and what values are and what purpose is. And yes, I help practice owners define what it is for them and what they want to be true about their business. But then there is a big challenge in rolling that out, because it's not just let's just put it on the wall and that's it.
Yeah. And I also think, change, when we think about how we go around implementing new values or whatever change we're making, like developing something around a culture, when people say, where does that start? I'll often say from the bottom up. So of course you've got to have leaders in terms of having that vision, something around here needs to change, and we're behind driving that change and kind of supporting that. But when we start by asking everyone at ground level, what is important to you? What do you think our values should be? And you almost have a kind of a two-way approach, which is the people on the ground are giving their view. The leaders will be sitting saying, actually, this is what we think is really important to fulfill the needs of our business, because they'll have the potentially bigger picture. And then you meet in the middle, and there has to be some kind of toing and froing. But that also requires the leaders to be happy about letting go of what they think are the ideals. So if you've got a lead, and I'm talking from experience of working with a company working with their leadership team who came up with what they thought were really important values. And actually they did that as individual leaders. They came together as a leadership team and then whittled those down to what they thought were important. And the company were also asking all their employees what they thought were important values. And they actually realized there's quite a lot of crossover, which wasn't surprising really, because when we're thinking about it ideally, we often come up with similar ones. In reality, it's quite different. And so they come up with quite a long list. And then they went back and said, right, let's get the wording right. We'll look at what these really mean. What do we mean by that particular phrase? So it's not just a nominalization, which doesn't, what's that look like? And the leadership team had to be quite okay about saying, well, yeah, actually, we're going to drop that one that we thought was really important, because that really doesn't mean anything to the rest of our organization. It's not going to make any difference. Or we're going to change the word. We really like that particular word, but we know that that's not the right word. It doesn't communicate the values clearly enough. So there's got to be that sense of real communication that goes kind of up and down, or if you haven't got the hierarchy across all the teams, and everyone at every level's open to negotiating and letting go of their ideals. I mean, I see that where we've, I might have maybe done some initial work with, so the clinics that I work with are probably smaller than the organizations that you might be working with. So it's not hundreds and hundreds of people in most cases. So with the smaller teams, it might even start with everybody in one room and just say, okay, guys, what does this business stand for and what are the values? So that tends to work really well, as long as everybody feels comfortable to speak up. Yes. So it's almost like there needs to be that level of trust in the room before because otherwise that exercise can sometimes just fall flat, because people feel fearful to voice their opinions. So you almost like kind of need to develop that trust and that team that, we're all in a safe place and we're all going to, we want to speak up. And yes, part of that is my role to establish that and those kind of rules of engagement. But if underlying that's not really there, no matter what I say in the room, to say, it's a safe place, you can say what you like, that's just not going to happen. And I think you've hit a nail on the head there, really, because lots of people will dive in and say, right, we need to start exploring, developing our values, but they miss the fact that people won't contribute to that process fully if they don't have that sense of trust. They don't feel safe to do so. And that's why I'm a real fan of getting massive pieces of paper and saying, right, this is what we think we want to start with. Now let's take a step back and say, is that the right starting point, or do we need to do something before that, or have we missed out a particular group of people? The whole bit about looking at your team culture, so looking at what, getting that culture right to be able to do the work around our values. And it's almost like a chicken and egg thing, isn't it? Because you want the right values in order for your team to be able to work well. But as a team, people need to understand what their purpose is. So what are they just trying to achieve as a team? And if you can just have conversations around, you're not trying to develop our values per se in terms of this is what we're going to be publishing and saying what we're all about, but why do I do what I do? And it's the why is really important. So what is it that brings me to work every day? What difference do I think I make by doing my role? And when you start to have these conversations in a team, and then the team gets a sense of what value they each provide, like I couldn't do my job if you didn't do your job, or this is how we help each other, and this is how we come together as we're, on our own we wouldn't be so great, but actually together we make a collective which provides a lot of value. And then it's looking at how you develop trust and how you recognize good practice, which isn't necessarily about results. It's about actually helping each other, or what do we think is important to notice about what's going well, and trying to guide that conversation away from just results, but about what do we feel good about, what do we want feedback for? And when you ask that kind of question, well, I want feedback for the fact I'm trying really hard, even if the outcome is not right, or I'm brave enough to have a go at something new, even if I don't feel confident about it, or I'm taking on a difficult conversation because I know it has to happen, even though it makes me feel really uncomfortable. So so as soon as you start having those conversations, you can almost pull the values out of that, and those conversations in themselves build trust.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game, and he talks about, you can have finite games within the infinite game. So your finite games are maybe the key results that you're striving towards, but actually the bigger picture, the infinite game, is really what connects everybody and what keeps everybody motivated, and that it's something bigger than themselves, and it's that kind of real purpose. And I see with clinics as an example, often the front of house team they kind of just see, their roles coming to work, answering the phone, going home, booking patients in, dealing with cancellations. And until there's that connection to the bigger picture for them, and saying, well, actually, you're an integral part of our team, and without you, the therapist can't do the treatment that get the patients better. And so, and it's really interesting when you see that connection that lights up and thinks, oh my gosh, that's what actually gets me coming back here. Because when that patient comes out and says, oh, I feel so much better, that lights up their lives as well as a therapist.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that whole sense of, whether it's about flattening a hierarchy or just merging the boundaries in terms of what we know about each other across different groups. I was talking to someone at a company recently about how, exactly as you said, you might have one person who would, if you put them in a hierarchy, would be right at the bottom, but that person's pivotal. It's a bit like a primary school. My kids go to the local primary school, and there's the lady who works in the office, and you might think, well, she's just a secretary or whatever she's called. But actually, she's the person who I almost think she's kind of in the engine room. If she wasn't there, things would fall apart. And so in terms of their sense of status, that should be, they are integral, they are hugely important, but they should be recognized for such. And I think when you hear each other's stories around, this is what this team really does, and this is a typical day in my life as a receptionist or a whatever, and these are the kinds of things I have to deal with, and these are the not so good things about my role, and these are the things I really love about my role, it really opens up other people's eyes to, wow, that sounds like you have quite a lot to deal with, or I didn't realize you had to have those kinds of conversations that regularly, or my goodness me, that sounds terrible part of your role, so well done for doing it. And we have our eyes open to just what else is going on, so that we have greater connection rather than kind of working in our little silos.
Yeah, and it's developing those intimate relationships, and that connection, and that compassion, and that kindness, and at the end of the day, that's all we want in life, isn't it? That you have a sense of belonging, We just recently in our Mastery Book Club, the book that we read was Fear Less by Dr. Pippa Grange.
Yes.
And it is just brilliant. And it is, just really talking about what kind of, obviously all about, fearing less. And she talks about winning deep rather than winning shallow. And that winning shallow is that almost related to that finite game of, we're going to hit these goals and then what next? And it's almost that material success. Or those kind of goal-driven successes, whereas winning deep is that where you feel that real fulfillment. And isn't that what we want from our kind of work experience, wherever we work and Absolutely. In the situation that we're in? And then to me, there's that almost sense of duty as a business owner, where you're bringing people together to work in your business, that you, to me, there's a real sense of wanting to create that experience for people. And if that sense of duty or sense of real kind of motivation and connection's not there for you to want to be doing that, then I've got to question, then I almost sometimes can look at a business and think, well, therein lies a big problem.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's, what you're describing can almost be summarized by the word happiness. And there's so much research which now shows that people's health, their physical health, mental health, is far better when they're happy, and when they're able to thrive, so to perform well, and they kind of get in that zone of being able to perform and enjoying what they're doing and just kind of feeling that sense of flow when they're happy. And happiness is not about success. So happiness is not, that the success is almost, that could be defined by those shallow wins. It's that sense of, well, I've ticked that off, or I've achieved my numbers or whatever. So yeah, I'm successful. But that is a kind of surface level success. And actually, when deep down we are at a level where we feel we have a sense of belonging, we have a sense of connectedness, we know we're recognized for our efforts, we're able to demonstrate our strengths, what we're doing day to day aligns with who I am as an individual, because the values, I've helped shape them. I know what my sense of purpose is, so I'm really emotionally engaged with that, because it's not someone just telling me this is what you've got to do, but I understand my part in the bigger picture, and I'm motivated to do the best I can. Once you start meeting those basic emotional needs, people are happier, and then people will naturally perform better and naturally get on better within their team, and you'll have fewer issues.
And Dan Pink's book Drive talks about how we are beyond, if you take the problem of money off the table, we will as humans be driven by autonomy, mastery and purpose. And to me, this is that whole purpose piece, is that if you're part of that bigger picture, and then you will be more inclined to have a better day at work. Absolutely. But that absolute happiness is key.
And I think also part of that is recognizing the fact that life is not all going to be rosy, because I think some people are really skeptical of that word happiness. They're like, oh, it's a bit free. And I'm far more serious than just being happy. Like, okay, we need to have a think about that. But when we start to kind of take a step back and we explore what we mean by happiness, we can see that's to do with a sense of stress. It's to do with reducing stress. It's to do with me being happy in a day-to-day. And what gets in the way of that often is conflict. So and people avoid conflict because they think it's going to get in the way of me feeling happy. It's going to get in the way of me feeling well. But conflict is so important, and we need to have conversations, like really, really good conversations about how do we all feel about conflict. And a lot of people will kind of go, oh, I don't like it. But actually, we need to have positive conflict. We need to have healthy conflict, which means we're able to say if there's a problem and it be okay, not a confrontation. We need to be able to express something that we're concerned about. If someone's done something wrong, or you think something could be done better, or you're just feeling a bit miffed about something, how do we communicate that? And how do we hear other people communicating that to us and feel safe and secure? And when we're looking at what makes a good team and a good team culture, part of the work I do, along with the work around trust and so on, is to explore that whole bit about conflict. We've got to feel safe to be able to point out when stuff's not going right, because 9 times out of 10, people either avoid it, which means all these issues stay there. And of course, that gets in the way of everything. Or we have a go at dealing with them, and we probably don't do it in such a great way. So then people are also not very happy. There's a kind of bit of an art to it, but it's not an art that's way off the kind of chart of being achievable. That starts with a good conversation about how do I feel, what would make it easier for me if you've got to speak to me about something, what makes it easier for that to land and feel okay, and just having those kinds of conversations within your team.
And it's just recognizing that one size doesn't fit all. So it's really being in tune with the different personalities that you're working with as well. But even having those upfront conversations of saying, how do you want me to deal with this with you? How, what is the best way for us to have this conversation? And I think that there's a lot of that just doesn't happen. And in fact, as you say, people avoid conflict because they think it's too difficult, and they're fearful of what will happen from the conflict.
But I think when that all for me fits in to that really important aspect of psychological safety, which is a really big part of creating a culture where people are happy and people can thrive and people want to be part of. And psychological safety, if you think about the kind of 4 stages about feelings, you feel included. So that's all being connected that we talked about. You feel safe to learn, and that's hugely important in terms of your development of your role. You can contribute. So I can contribute my ideas and know that I'm not going to be shot down. I can contribute my ideas that might be a bit way off what we'd normally do around here, because I'm being creative and innovative, and which of course we want in our organizations now. And I know that people will be open to hearing that. But the final stage is about being able to challenge. So that, part of having a psychologically safe culture incorporates that need to be able to challenge and to challenge safely and to feel safe with that. So it's really, really important part to kind of for people to get their heads around.
One of the other books that we have looked at in our book club is Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and she talks about how a lot of the time a lot of owners or business managers and things are so worried about offending people, and they really care personally about the person, so they care so much about the person that they don't want, but then they're so worried about giving direct feedback that they sit in this ruinous empathy space where they're not doing themselves any favors, and they're not doing the person that needs the feedback any favors. And she talks about how you need that radical candor where you really have to care personally for the person, so you're providing that safe space and you're creating that area of safety, that it's safe for you to directly give feedback, but safe for them to challenge your feedback as well.
It reminds me of Dave Greenaway, who we were talking about just before we started school. Always has this saying, which I should probably get completely wrong, but something about you should never just sit on the fence, in terms of just, if you know something needs to happen, you just got to get on and do it. But if you sit on the fence, you get splinters. And it's a sense of actually, exactly. And you know what, things do come back to bite you if you just try and avoid them because life feels simpler. In the long run, it doesn't do anyone any favors.
No. And I guess some of the, some when we're working on the kind of, trying to really understand what that culture is and what that purpose is, and therefore what the values are that the organization, that everybody in the organization stands by, kind of filtering down from that, when you get the team together and you start saying, okay, so if this is one of the things that we want to show, that we provide a really personalized service for our patients and we really care about each and everyone that comes through the door, what does that mean about our behaviors? And going through the entire patient journey and saying, so what does that mean when we answer the phone? What does that mean when the patient arrives? What does that mean when we bring them into the treatment room? What does that mean when we're giving them our advice? And kind of going through that whole thing and doing that together with a team, I think can sometimes help a lot when you do have to have difficult conversations, because now it's not about the person, it's about
Exactly.
the act that's going that's going against the value.
Exactly. Yeah. And it kind of, it depersonalizes it, doesn't it? And actually when we're able to say, you know, I noticed that you didn't do this or whatever, and you can follow that up with, that's okay, because we're all still trying to get our head around these new values, or I recognize you're stressed, because we know that high emotional arousal really stops us behaving in the way we want to behave. We tend to revert to behaviors that aren't necessarily so helpful outwards. When we can communicate that, so we're not doing it in a way of judging or blaming, you got it wrong, but actually I'm just pointing out, just letting you know that I noticed, and I know normally you're really good at that, or I noticed that you did do that yesterday, so I know you can do it. So you very, again, it's about the use of language around that. But I think, yeah, using the values as a way of, it's holding people accountable to those, so rather than focus on the individuals.
Yeah, and actually I think when it's done, you know, when it's really worked well, and it's, you know, and you have got that level of trust within the team, then almost the owner doesn't need to be doing all that, because the individual, you know, the team members are going to be kind of holding each other account to them, and
of course,
and helping each other to meet those you know, values.
Yeah. And when people have in their team meetings, for example, part of that possibly explicitly is around, what have we done to fulfill our or demonstrate our values this week or this month, then we start to bring to our consciousness, our conscious awareness, a lot more about the kinds of behaviors that fulfill these values, and what we are recognizing and what we're celebrating. So the person who's sat at their desk and unable to move away from the desk, they feel their work pressure's too much, and they're keeping their head down, switching off from everybody. They might feel that that's what is needed of me right now. But if that's going against what the values are within that team, in terms of meeting together for lunch or whatever their values are, whatever their behaviors are behind those values, then we're able to gently bring people back on board, and but not doing that in a way that's critical. And I think that makes it a lot easier to keep people on board, because they believe in it, and they understand why they're important.
Yeah, and I really think that sometimes where I've noticed is that, you know, you can, even if you work with your team together and define the purpose of the business and define the values and talk about behaviors and things, and maybe that's done in like a, you know, 1 or 2 day strategy session, and it's fantastic, and everyone comes together and they leave with, you know, feeling really excited about the whole thing, and then they get back into their individual roles, and a few months later that's kind of forgotten. And I think that's where I'd be interested in your kind of, so you've given an example of actually explicitly sitting in your team meetings, but how else can one just, you know, what techniques can one use to just keep that fire alive and everyone kind of engaged in that, whilst they're kind of maybe stressed with a patient list that's got 3 weeks waiting list? And
I think it's about keeping it alive through the conversations, which are, whether it's in your team meetings, also one-to-one. So making sure, you know, for me, there are very rarely enough one-to-one check-ins, and people say, I don't have time. But for me, if people create the time to have those one-to-one check-ins, it reduces their work longer term, because they have fewer issues. So if you're checking in with people, and you're not, you know, you don't want someone to be going down a checklist of the values and saying what you're doing, but having a natural conversation which is around those values. So whatever those values are, and being able to kind of shape the conversation around, you know, what's getting in the way for you achieving these, or what are you feeling proud about? And also as a whole organization, you can have themes like, this week we're really going to focus on this particular value, and you might have someone who will write a little blog piece about it, or someone who's going to talk about a really good piece of practice that they're proud of. So for example, it might be how they've engaged with a client or with a colleague, or something that they've done. So you start to get people signing up to talk about and share good practice. And whether you do that via a little blog or via, video blogs or whatever, you start to really highlight this through kind of just keeping it alive through these conversations. And also when you're visiting anything, like you're reviewing your policies, for example, everything has to come through that lens of, does this fit our values? So being very clear about that, when we're emailing people, are we still fulfilling our values? And actually asking people to have a focus. This week we're going to really think about our emails, or we're really going to think about how we communicate with our clients, or and actually giving people a very specific focus. So it's got to be specific enough to be tangible, that people can really grasp and know what it is that they're focusing on. If we're too vague and say we're going to focus on the value of, I don't know, friendliness, that's like really but something really, really kind of vague like that, it's like you're not going to achieve anything from that. So what are the behaviors we're looking for? What opportunities have we got to build on those? And how are we going to demonstrate that this week? And then you come back and you share that practice and you celebrate and you say, well, actually, that's all well and good, but it was really hard in this particular situation. And then as a team, you problem solve that and say, well, that's because that client's values really are so different to ours. And how can we get around that? Or, you start to unpick the challenges, but you do that collectively rather than the individual feeling it's their responsibility.
And I think with that as well, if as an example your clients' values are different, it's fine if they're different as long as they're not in conflict. And I think it is recognizing that if it's in conflict, that actually maybe the best decision is to not have that client, because it's causing the whole team so much distress. And knowing, and again, that kind of comes to, I can't tell you how many times I've had clients who have had someone that's just not working out in the organization, and they've tried everything, they've literally, they can look at themselves in the mirror and say, I have done my very best to turn the situation around. And if I ask them and say, well, what's your gut telling you? And they're just like, it's definitely just not right. And then if I go back and say, what did your gut tell you when you first took this person on board? And there will sometimes be times where they think, the skill set on the CV was absolutely perfect. I thought that the person was a little bit arrogant, or a little bit this, or a little bit that, but actually I really thought I could get by. And 9 times out of 10, that situation never pans out for the good.
Because you've got to connect at an emotional level. You've got to just click. And if someone has got most of what they need in terms of skills and competence and so on, but they really fit well into the team, and they've got the right mindset in terms of, I'm willing to learn and experiment and kind of to be guided and to receive feedback and so on, then they are going to be a great fit, because you can always teach someone skills and competencies. But if they're not the right fit in terms of who they are as an individual, then actually, you're so right. It's so hard. And the impact that has, the ripples on the rest of the team, whether it's a particular employee or a particular client, can just be so damaging. It's far better to be working with people who are aligned with your values. And
I love what you say about the regular one-to-ones. And I think that that's definitely a challenge that our sector have, because, often the owner of the business is very much involved in the delivery of the service as well. So, they've got a full clinical list, and that's kind of where I, say to them, well, you absolutely need to put those one-to-ones in your diary, because your people are going to be the success of your business, really. And the one-to-ones are the things that sometimes fall behind, and it's like, we've got such a long waiting list, we have to see these patients. And well, actually, your team are actually also your most important patients, and you need to put time in working on your business, interacting with your team, so that you can achieve whatever those objectives are, but more importantly, that everybody's happy, because people like that engagement. Some owners will say to me, but people just want to get on and do what they want to do, and
I think that's an excuse.
Exactly.
I completely agree with what you're saying. I think there's been so much over the last number of years about the fact that employees want more one-to-ones, they want more check-ins, not check-ins in the sense of are you doing your job properly, but how are you doing,
how are you.
And actually there's some research I was reading recently which shows that people are struggling. Obviously they're struggling more, many people have been struggling during the pandemic, but the number of people having check-ins just have dropped because people are so busy. And it's like you're saying, if you imagine if you had a conductor of an orchestra and the conductor decided to sit down and play their own instrument, everything's going to fall apart. You can't do it all. And when people say, well, I've got a full job, I've got a full role, yet I'm supposed to be managing a team on the side, I will really challenge that and say, you actually have to find time. It's not a luxury. You have to put it in your diary. So kind of regular, every week, this is the time I'm going to be checking in with people. And that has to be a priority. If you don't do that, you're almost just kind of ticking the box of, I'm here, they know who their manager is. If there's an issue, I'll speak to them. If there's something I need to tell them, I'll tell them. But you're not really doing any more than that. And for me, that's not really, that's far from good management. A good manager is, as you say, it's knowing how people are getting on. If someone's having a bit of a wobble this week because there's something going on at home, it's knowing about that and working out what we can do to support you so that you can get through that wobble and carry on working, at the end of it, rather than going off on sick leave because actually you've been so stressed trying to balance everything. It's kind of, we have to know what's getting in the way for people to be able to work well, what they're feeling uncertain about, what they're excited about, what challenges they're having. We have to have those regular check-ins. And if we don't, then people are not going to come to us when they've got a bit of a wobble because they are not used to having those conversations. So people say, I can't just phone or I can't just speak to my manager because because they're so busy. Whereas if you know that every week you're going to have even a 10-minute phone call, or it doesn't matter what it is, how informal, but you can have that, then that's the time you might say, well, actually this week it's been a bit tough because.
Yeah. And if one of the things that we are driven by as human beings is a sense of belongingness, by not having those one-to-ones, you're just never creating that sense of belongingness for you or for them.
I always ask when I'm working with managers who say they don't have time to do this one-to-ones, I'll ask them, I'll get them to write down what their role is about. What do you're a manager, what is your role? And if they just focus on all the stuff to do with their day-to-day practice, their other job, then I say, well, basically you're not a manager then. You might be on paper, someone might be paying you as a manager or calling you a manager, but actually you're not doing the job of a manager. So if you were to carve out, if you were to think about a good manager you've had, what made them a good manager? If you think about what support you need, what is that? What would be helpful right now? And of course, if you've got someone saying, well, I don't need anything, then you actually might just have to help them understand that actually most people do need something. And those conversations are really important. And actually then sit down and work out, okay, if you've got this number of people on your team, ask the people on the team, and it might have to be someone else asking them, how often do you want to have check-ins? How do you want to have those check-ins? Work out then how much time that is in your week or in your month. And then that's the time it's got to go in the diary.
And then I guess a bigger question is, do you actually want to be a manager? Because I know I've seen, and I know I made the mistake in my own business in South Africa where, you promote someone up to a management level and actually all they wanted to do was a technical job. They did not want to be managing all these people. They were not interested in the least. It was like kind of that, oh, this is a career progression, so this person's going up into the management role. He did not want to be that. And I think that's where Kim Scott talks about rock stars and superstars. Some people just want to be that rock star in the organization where they are doing the doing and they're doing it really, really well and they're an expert in that. Yes. And then others might want to progress up the ladder into different management roles. And it is, kind of recognizing that as well.
Yes. And I think it's really interesting, like, how you just explained that kind of you go up the ladder and you become a manager. And I think that's why there's a real shift now for lots of organizations around from that sense of having a ladder and having a hierarchy, because it's almost like to achieve more status, to achieve greater pay, to greater recognition, whatever, I've got to go up. And that means I've got to become a manager. And it's like, actually, we took that whole model out and said, either flatten the hierarchy and say, we are all experts in our own right. Some of us are experts in dealing with people, and therefore I will lead a team of people. Some of us are experts at, being the rock stars, as you say, and I'm brilliant at this particular product or this particular process, and I'm going to focus on that. So if everyone becomes an expert in their own right, who equally are able to go up that ladder together, or just stay put and just expand who you are in that place and get your recognition for that, and surely that's better, because it takes away that sense of competition and that need to fulfill a role or take on a role that actually you can't fulfill because you don't have the skills or competencies or the want to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so how does one portray your culture, your values, your, like, how do you kind of put it across into the world for people to want to come and work with you? How does that get communicated? At the moment, with recruitment being a challenge, not just in our, it's a challenge in our sector, getting therapists on board, but I read an article several months ago now, written by I think it was a kind of collaboration of a few head chefs, and they got together and they were just talking about how it's really sad that the front of house career opportunities in the hospitality sector are very much seen as very kind of temporary. So you don't, it's not a career. You don't go into that and do that for the rest of your life. And they were talking about how, they really need to change that, the perspective of that, because it can be a really fulfilling career for those that are really interested in it.
And I think that's that. Yeah, a lot of people, when they're looking to recruit, will focus on the role. They'll focus on, this is what the job is. This is the kind of number of hours or where you'll be based, and that kind of thing. And I think when companies move away from that and talk much more about their company and much more about the values and much more about kind of what's in it for the employees. So, and, having employees providing a quote about what it's like to work there, or, when companies who are recruiting, within their information, they'll send links to their website, and on their website, they've got employees talking about kind of doing this, going back to those blogs or those kind of little mini videos talking about, this is what I love about working here, and this is what's really important to us working here, and this is, talking about the reality of working in this place. But it's employees doing that rather than just the leaders in the organization. So people start to get a real flavor of what it's like, and it's not just being written down in a job description, these are our values, but you've got people talking with a sense of excitement about, when we're working here, we're able to be experimental, and we're able to have a go at new things, and know that if things don't quite go right, we can have someone who's going to have our back, because we're all in it together as a team. And I'm able to work flexibly, which is really important to me. I have regular check-ins with people, so that they're really interested, looking after me and hearing who I am and what's going well for me and what's not, and I get the support I need, and just all that kind of stuff. That's the stuff that people want to know about right now. And I think that has to be communicated through everything from the outset when you're thinking about recruitment. But to hear it from the people involved, find a way of getting access to kind of real feedback is really powerful. Yeah, completely. And I think people are looking for experience. So yes, there might be an element of there will be a sense of, well, I need to earn a certain amount, certain salary. But actually, I've had so many examples of people that have worked in a place and kind of moved to another place because the income is better, and found very quickly that actually they'd rather earn less money and have a better experience. Yeah, and I think that's what the research quite clearly shows now. Actually, it's not about money, and people often talk about perks that are not that meaningful. So being clear about what it is that people are really interested in. So people want flexible working. So if you're able to offer flexible working, talking about that, and talking about how you enable people to prioritize their own sense of well-being. So for example, that you'll allow people to kind of within limits of obviously how the practice works, but there's flexibility for people to be able to go for a walk at lunchtime, or to go to the gym, or to take to work in a kind of flexible way that enables them to live the healthy lifestyle that they need, or to be able to connect with their family at a time that when their family are around. Or so and that comes back to being clear about what your values are as an organization, and how what you're okay with and what you're not okay with, and recognizing that we're all individuals. You can't just kind of plonk everyone into one bucket and have, this is how we do things in this company. I mean, you can do that, but you're going to miss out a lot of people. Having that very individual approach is brilliant in terms of people thinking, actually, I could see myself working there, because they're going to listen to who I really am, how I work best, what I really need. If I'm struggling with something, they'll understand. They're ticking the boxes for me in terms of being able to prioritize my family, or my well-being, or flexible working, or whatever it is. That's definitely going to get my interest.
And then putting that out there, then there's that real sense of responsibility, and you need to then deliver that. So it's like if you were advertising in your website that you're going to have this amazing experience when you come into my business, and you get into my business and it's like, oh, that's not connecting the dots. And it's exactly the same, I think, with your advert needs to then you need to live that.
Yes, which is why I think because there's that real disconnect has come through for too many people, unfortunately, where they sign up to an organization and they're like, the practice really is so different to what they promised me at interview. I spoke to someone recently who's like, actually, it's just as good as it was promised at interview. And I was like, well, thank goodness.
Oh, wow.
But actually, if people are also very wary of that. It looks good on paper, and at the interview, they're kind of selling it to me, but what's the reality going to be like? So if you can enable people to hear a little bit about what it is really like from people who are in it and living it, then that's awesome. If you as a company, if you have a sense of practice where you're checking in regularly about great processes, great achievements, recognizing your values in practice, you're kind of doing all the stuff that we've been talking about today, rather than just talk about in a team meeting. Put something really quickly, even if it's just a LinkedIn post, or if it's a really short thing on a blog that you set up, whatever it is, because that's the stuff that people will go and check out. So that's the stuff that if someone says to me about a potential client, I'll go and have a look and see what they're talking about on their LinkedIn, because are they someone who is interested in their people or not? And it comes through in their messaging. So people will now start doing their homework. So you just need to make sure you're getting the right information out there. Was it Zappos, I think, that invited people to come into the organization? So if they were going through the interview process, there was a whole process that went on, but one of the kind of key areas was that they'd invite them in for a day and they'd say, there's this department, there's that department, go around and speak to whoever you want, and and come and meet me over here for lunch. And so they were like literally so confident that the candidates would get the experience that they had promised in the interview, and that they'd promised in their their job advert, etc. And they were completely confident that everybody on the team was absolutely upheld the values, and that that it was safe for them to just let them go and explore and speak to everybody. That's awesome, isn't it? And I think that the lovely thing about that is when the company the company owner, the manager, whoever, gets the feedback from all the people within their organization, what that person was like. So for example, when they came into your office, clinic, whatever, and they are seeing that person front of desk, how were they towards you? So did they have this view that you're less important than that person? So because it comes back to recruiting the right people. So it's not just a one-way process. Both the potential employee and the company have got to be confident it's the right fit. So imagine at the end of that day, the manager going and speaking to everyone, saying, what did you think of them? How did they interact? How did they engage? Because how that's the best way of finding out when it's unofficial and they're not out there to impress. That's when you see the real side of people.
I many years ago, I did a eMyth Revisited course in London just for our business. And there were several other business owners around the table. And there was this one particular gentleman from Scotland, and he was quite far away from the airport. And so when they recruited, generally they weren't recruiting just from their local area, because, you know, there's just, you know, not very many people that would have applied for the position in their local area. So it would often be from around the world, around the country, whatever. So often people would fly in. And what this guy did was, he had a taxi driver that he knew that picked the guy up from the airport. They stopped at a restaurant on the way of an owner, the owner of which he knew. And then, you know, when they eventually got to the reception and interacted with the reception before they went in for the interview, the owner would know if that guy was going to be employed or not, just from the feedback that they got from the taxi driver, the restaurant owner, the waitress at the restaurant. And I just thought, you know, amazing.
And that's the best way, is it? Because you want, it's about being authentic, and everyone can talk the talk at some point and you know, blag it a little bit, but actually you want to see what people are really like, and it's finding those opportunities and making it very clear that it's a two-way process. And I think, you know, that if you make that clear, if the person's lucky enough to get to the room to have the conversation, the interview, then again, it's about, I'm not here just to try and impress you. You know, it's got to be mutual, and I think that gets you the right footing as well. Isn't it? You're taking that sense of hierarchy out from word go.
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you today. And so I wondered if we could just end on me asking you to kind of give a very quick fire summary on planning for positive employee experience.
Whoa, okay. So I would start, I think my number one message would be communication. So to have clarity within your leadership team about what it is you're looking for and why, but also from the ground up and working together collectively on what that looks like, what good culture looks like. If I came to work here and this is the perfect place, what would it be like? And as soon as you ask people to create that perfect image, that sense of this is my dream clinic, you then have insight into what you need to work on and then how to go about that. And creating, you know, thinking about psychological safety and getting beyond those terms, thinking, oh my goodness, I have no idea what that means, or I don't know how to go about that, is thinking, actually, let's go back to number one, included. What does that mean for us? When do we feel most included, connected? And starting to just unpick, if you just unpick and then look at what good practices are already in place, and then start to look at where there are gaps. And people, if you ask people, they'll tell you. So if you ask people what needs to happen to fill that gap, what needs to happen to get around that particular challenge in this clinic, people 9 times out of 10 will have some really good ideas, but it's about having those conversations.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lisa. I have thoroughly enjoyed this chat with you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Celia. Thank you.